Hello, and welcome to a brief tutorial on the Smith and Ragan model, developed by Stephen McWilliams, Timothy Roberts, and Jorge Rivera. I am your presenter, Stephen McWilliams. The objectives of this course are to understand all three phases of the Smith and Ragan model, identify the 8 steps of the model, and understand the application of the Smith and Ragan model. Following this tutorial, students will be assessed with a 5-question quiz at the end of the lesson. The Smith and Ragan model was developed off of the cognitive learning theories developed by Robert Gagne. It is a systems-oriented model that lends itself in the development of large instructional projects. This model is usable when there is large amounts of data and resources to the design team and requires detailed front-end analysis and utilizes pilot and test programs before the instruction is delivered. According to the Smith and Ragan model, instructional design is conducted in 3 phases. The analysis phase is a contextual analysis that seeks to answer where we're going and assesses the learning context, learners, learning tasks, and ends with written test items. The second phase designs an instructional strategy that determines how we'll get there. The strategy phase determines the organizational, delivery, and management strategies and concludes with writing and production of the instruction. The final phase evaluates the curriculum to determine if or when we have arrived and applies evaluation results into course revisions as needed. Therefore, the purpose of this model is the prescription or the process involved in the systematic planning of instruction. Now that we have reviewed the purpose of the Smith and Ragan model, we can understand that their approach is not unique. As an example, Roger Kaufman uses the same 3 questions to determine objectives. This slide will explain the components of the Smith and Ragan model. This model has 3 phases and 8 steps. You will notice the similarities between the 3 phases and other instructional design models. However, there is a distinct difference between this model and other instructional design strategies. First, 3 phases of analysis, strategy, and evaluation provide a framework for the 8 steps that make up the instructional design process. Then, the 8-step approach includes analyzing the learning environment, analyze learners, analyze learning tasks, write test items, determine instructional strategies, produce instruction, conduct formative evaluation, and revise instruction. In the analysis phase, analyze the learning environment has 2 parts. The first part is to analyze the learners to describe the characteristics required of the learner in their environment. The second part is to describe and write the appropriate learning goals for the learner. To close out this phase, write test items describes different methods and procedures to assess different learning objectives. In the strategy phase, determine instructional strategies describes different steps to present strategies for organizing and managing instruction. Produce instruction is the step that provides strategies for translating the decisions and specifications made in the previous steps into instructional materials and training guides. In the evaluation phase, conduct formative evaluation is the step that offers procedures for evaluating the effectiveness of the instructional materials both during development and after implementation. Revise instruction offers a process for instructional designers to modify the proposed instruction. While these 8 steps appear to be linear, instructional designers should understand that the evaluation and assessment is continuous and concurrent. As such, instructional designers should adjust methods and strategies accordingly. Please take a moment to review the advantages of the Smith and Ragan model. In addition to the advantages listed in this slide, the system approach represents a method for designers to work within complex instructional situations
so that they can describe and analyze complications within the instructional process, identifying dysfunctions and incompatibilities within the system. Proponents of the Smith and Ragan's ID model assert that the linearity of the system affords instructors the opportunity to consider instructional problems from a broad perspective, enabling instructors to solve problems identified within the instructional system. Taking a historical perspective, systems models initially were used by the military to develop large weapon systems in the 1950s. Systems model, such as the Smith and Ragan's ID model, was influenced by system theory, system analysis, and system engineering. The military, business, and industry were the largest consumers of this theory. However, system models were adopted and discussed by school managers and academic leaders to address administrative, organizational, and managerial issues. Hence, it was understood that this approach could be applied to other education-related areas, such as total quality management. Please take a moment to review the disadvantages of the Smith and Ragan model. While some researchers regard the model as a useful design tool for educational purposes, some researchers describe it as a prescriptive model of limited value. Critics of the Smith and Ragan model suggest that changes in one unit or section of a design require instructors or designers to make alterations to other units or sections, since analysis and assessment, instructional strategy, implementation, management, and evaluation are interlinked in each phase of this model. During or after instruction, parts of a design might require revision based on feedback from teaching and learning process. In such cases, strict adherence to the Smith and Ragan model would require complete reapplication of all phases of the design process. And now we've reached the end of our content. It's time for a check on learning. What are the phases of the Smith and Ragan model? If you answered evaluation, analysis, and instructional strategy, you are correct. The analysis phase seeks to answer If you answered where we are going, you are correct. The purpose of the Smith and Ragan model is if you answered the prescription or process and planning instruction, you are correct. The 8-step approach includes if you answered analyzing the learner, conduct formative evaluation, and writing test items, you are correct. What is not an advantage of the Smith and Ragan model? If you answered, it is linear, making it easy to apply and understand, you are correct. Over this short tutorial, we explained the 3 phases of the Smith and Ragan model, identified the 8 steps of the Smith and Ragan model, discussed the application of the model, and we assessed learning with a 5-question quiz.
The references used in building this tutorial are listed below. This concludes our short tutorial on the Smith and Ragan model.